The aroma of fresh coffee filled the small establishment on Bleecker Street, in the heart of New York City. Florence tied her striped apron for the 10th time that morning, her fingers trembling with exhaustion after another poorly slept night on the living room sofa, giving up the bed for her mother who needed proper rest. 24 years old, brown hair tied in a simple bun, eyes that still shone with hope despite the difficult circumstances. She wiped the counter for the 3rd time, checking the clock on the wall. 7:15 in the morning. He would arrive any moment. At the phone, bell on the door tinkled softly, and Florence felt her heart tighten with a mixture of compassion and determination. There he was, Mr. Oswald, as she had discovered his name was a few weeks ago. A man who appeared to be over 80, bent by the weight of decades lived, always wearing the same simple, worn clothes, a brown coat with visible patches on the elbows, corduroy trousers that had once been green but were now an indefinite color. His shoes, though clean, had soles that were coming loose. What touched Florence most, however, were his hands that trembled incessantly, like leaves in the wind, making it impossible for him to perform simple tasks without help. "Good morning, Mr. Oswald," Florence said with a genuine smile, gently guiding him to the corner table, the one near the window that he seemed to prefer. The elderly man nodded gratefully, his faded blue eyes meeting hers with an expression that seemed to hold 1,000 untold stories. Florence prepared the coffee as she always did, a simple espresso, the only thing he could afford with the counted coins he took from his pocket each morning. $2.50, enough for a small coffee, nothing more. She approached the table carrying the cup with care, pulled up a chair, and sat beside him. With delicate and patient movements, Florence held the cup while guiding it to Mr. Oswald's trembling lips. Slowly, without rush. She had learned that he liked to savor each sip, closing his eyes as if that moment was sacred. 15 minutes. That was the time Florence dedicated every morning to helping him drink his coffee, talking softly about the weather, about the birds flying outside, about the small joys of everyday life. "Florence, you imbecile," Robert's harsh voice echoed through the cafe, shattering the tranquility of the moment. "How many times do I have to tell you that you're here to work, not to run a charity?" The owner of the establishment, a stout man in his early 40s with a thick mustache and always calculating eyes, crossed the room with heavy steps. "There are 3 tables waiting to be cleared, and you're here wasting time with this old man who barely pays for what he consumes." Mr. Oswald lowered his head in shame, and Florence felt anger boil in her chest. "I'm sorry, Robert, but I was just helping. It's only a few minutes." "Only a few minutes," Robert repeated with a sneer, crossing his arms over his grease-stained apron. "Do you know how much every minute is worth in this establishment? He occupies a table for a whole hour for the price of 1 coffee. He's a walking problem. If he can't even hold a cup, he should stay home." The words fell over the cafe like a dark cloud. Some customers looked away, uncomfortable. Others continued their conversations, indifferent. Florence took a deep breath, reminding herself that she needed this job. Her mother's medications cost almost $1,000 a month, and with the minimum wage she received, plus tips, she could barely keep the bills paid. Her mother, Celia, suffered from a chronic condition that left her weak and debilitated, requiring expensive drugs that the public health system did not regularly provide. "I'll get back to work now," Florence murmured, gently squeezing Mr. Oswald's shoulder before standing up. The old man nodded almost imperceptibly, his eyes moist. Robert huffed and went back behind the counter, but not before casting a warning glance at Florence. As she cleared the tables Robert had mentioned, she felt the weight of her co-worker Patricia's gaze. Patricia, a 30-year-old woman with bleached blonde hair and always impeccably manicured nails, watched everything with a poorly disguised smile of satisfaction. "You never learn, do you, Florence?" she said, as she passed by carrying a tray. "You play the saint with the old man and then complain you have no money. If you used your time to get more tips from customers who actually pay well, maybe you wouldn't have to wear those old clothes every day." Florence bit her tongue, refusing to get into another useless argument with Patricia. They had started working at the cafe at almost the same time 2 years ago. But while Florence struggled to survive, Patricia lived with her parents in a comfortable apartment on the Upper East Side, working only to have her own money to spend on clothes and parties. Patricia's envy was palpable whenever a customer praised Florence's kindness or left a generous tip for her. The following weeks followed the same cruel pattern. Every morning, Mr. Oswald arrived punctually at 7:15. Every morning, Florence patiently helped him with his coffee, and every morning Robert found new ways to humiliate her and the old man. One day he placed a sign on Mr. Oswald's table saying minimum charge $10. Another day he threatened to charge an occupancy fee if the old man stayed for more than 30 minutes. Florence always found discreet ways to circumvent Robert's cruelties, sometimes paying the difference from her own pocket, other times convincing Robert that more customers would come if he showed compassion. Mr. Oswald never complained. He accepted the humiliations with a silent dignity that broke Florence's heart. Sometimes she would see him watching the busy streets of New York through the window with an expression so profoundly melancholic that she wondered what kind of life he had lived before ending up there, alone, with no one to care for him. She tried a few times to talk more deeply, to find out if he had family, where he lived, if he needed any additional help, but Mr. Oswald was reserved, responding only with polite monosyllables. One Tuesday morning, 3 months after Mr. Oswald had become a regular customer, Florence arrived at the cafe with her eyes swollen from crying. The previous night had been terrible. Her mother had a crisis, the shortness of breath returned, with intensity, and Florence had to take her to the emergency room at 2 in the morning. The doctor was direct. They needed more specialized tests, more advanced treatments, even more expensive medications, everything Florence couldn't afford. She had spent her last savings on the taxi to and from the hospital. As she prepared the coffee for Mr. Oswald, her hands trembled almost as much as his. When she sat down to help him, the old man observed her with a different intensity, as if he could see through her facade of courage. "It's all right, my child," he said, in his weak, hoarse voice. It was the first time he had said more than a few words. The most violent storms precede the most beautiful dawns. Florence felt tears threaten to overflow, but she smiled and thanked him, not fully understanding what he meant. Robert that morning was particularly irritated. Florence heard him arguing on the phone about overdue taxes, suppliers demanding payment, accumulated debts. When he slammed the phone down, his gaze fell on the corner table where Florence was helping Mr. Oswald. Something inside him seemed to snap. He crossed the cafe with furious steps, knocking over a chair on the way. "Enough!" he roared, making all the customers turn in alarm. "I can't take this anymore. You, old man, your presence here is an insult to my business. You spend pennies and take up valuable space. And you, Florence, if you keep wasting my time with this beggar, you can find another job." Mr. Oswald tried to stand up, his hands gripping the edge of the table for support, but weakness and tremors made every movement a battle. Robert continued his venomous speech, now pointing a finger in the old man's face. "People like you should be ashamed to go out in public. Don't you have family to take care of you? You probably don't even have a home." It was then that something happened that no one expected. The cafe door burst open, the bell tinkling frantically. 3 men entered, dressed in impeccable Italian-cut suits, silk ties, shoes that shone even in the dim light of the establishment. Behind them, 2 athletically built bodyguards, wearing sunglasses and earpieces. The silence that fell was absolute. Robert stopped mid-tirade, his mouth still open, his eyes wide. Florence instinctively held Mr. Oswald's hand as if to protect him from further cruelty. The men in suits looked around the cafe with serious professional expressions. The tallest of them, a man of about 50 with perfectly coiffed grey hair, stepped forward. "We are looking for Mr. Oswald Thompson," he announced in a firm, authoritative voice. All eyes turned to the corner table, where the old man remained seated, now with an expression Florence couldn't decipher. Was it fear? Was it relief? Or was it something else entirely? Florence felt her heart race. Florence looked at Mr. Oswald, expecting to see confusion or fear in his eyes, but what she found was a surprising calm. The old man nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting for this moment. The grey-haired man approached the table with measured steps, followed by the other two lawyers and the bodyguards who remained near the door. "Mr. Thompson," he said respectfully, bowing his head slightly, "we apologize for the intrusion, but we need you to come with us. There has been an urgent situation." Robert, still paralyzed behind the counter, finally found his voice. "Wait a minute. Who are you people? What's going on here? This is my establishment, and I won't have you barging in like this." The lawyer didn't even glance in Robert's direction. Instead, he took a thin leather folder from his inner jacket pocket and placed it on the table, away from the coffee cup. "Mr. Thompson is Oswald Thompson, president and majority shareholder of the Thompson Enterprises Group, a conglomerate with assets valued at approximately $8 billion, including construction companies, hotels, shopping malls, and real estate developers across the United States." The floor seemed to disappear from under Florence's feet. She looked at Mr. Oswald, at that frail man in patched clothes whom she had helped every day, and couldn't process the information. Billions of dollars, it was impossible, it had to be a mistake. But the expression on the lawyers' faces was absolutely serious. Robert let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. "That's ridiculous," he stammered. "This old man barely has money to pay for a coffee. You're clearly in the wrong place." One of the other lawyers, a younger man with thin-rimmed glasses, opened a briefcase and began to leaf through documents. "Mr. Robert Fonseca, owner of this establishment, correct? We have here a rather complete dossier on your business activities. Labor irregularities, tax evasion, health code violations. The IRS will be very interested in this material." The tone was cold, professional, deadly. Robert turned visibly pale, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. Patricia, who had been watching everything with growing astonishment, took a step back, as if wanting to disappear among the tables. Florence continued to hold Mr. Oswald's hand, her mind spinning in circles, trying to understand. "Why?" she finally whispered, turning to him. "Why did you do this? Why the disguise?" The old man looked at her with eyes that now seemed to carry an immense weight, not of poverty but of loneliness. "My wife," he began in a choked voice, "she always said that the true measure of a person is not in what they possess, but in how they treat those who can offer nothing in return. When she passed away 2 years ago, she left a void that all the money in the world cannot fill. I needed to know if genuine kindness still existed in this world. I needed to find someone who would care for me, not for what I have, but simply because it's the right thing to do." The words hit Florence like waves, one after another. She felt tears streaming down her face without being able to control them. For 3 months he had been testing not only her, but everyone in the cafe, and only she had passed the test. Mr. Oswald squeezed her hand with all the strength his trembling fingers could muster. "You showed me that my wife was right, Florence. Kindness exists, compassion exists, and it exists in you." The moment was interrupted by the older lawyer's cell phone, which he answered immediately. His face, already serious, became even graver. "Mr. Thompson," he said with urgency, "it's about Miss Isabella. She's had a crisis. She's being taken to Mount Sinai Hospital right now. The doctor said it's serious." Mr. Oswald tried to get up quickly, but his legs failed him. Florence instinctively supported him, helping him to his feet as the bodyguards approached to assist. "My daughter," the old man murmured, anguish evident in every syllable. "I need to go to her. I need to be there." The lawyers moved with military efficiency, one already on the phone arranging transport, another collecting the folders. Robert, realizing he was losing control of the situation and driven by a mixture of panic and anger, suddenly pointed at Florence. "She's fired!" he shouted, his voice shrill. "Florence, get your things and get out of my establishment now. You're a liar, a manipulator. You were probably planning to con this gentleman from the beginning." The accusations were so absurd that Florence couldn't even respond. She was fired. The reality of the situation hit her like a bucket of cold water. No job, no money for her mother's medicine. Nothing. Mr. Oswald, however, turned to Robert with an expression that, despite his physical frailty, carried an undeniable authority. "You have made a terrible mistake, Robert. And you will pay for every cruel word, for every humiliation you inflicted not only on me, but on this young woman who has shown more dignity in 3 months than you have in your entire life. Turning to Florence, Mr. Oswald held her hands in his. "Come with me, please. I need you." Florence blinked, confused. "Me? What for?" "Just come. Trust me as I have trusted you all these days." She nodded, not fully understanding, but feeling that she owed this man at least that much. The lawyers and bodyguards escorted them out of the cafe, where 3 black SUVs were waiting. Florence had never been in such a luxurious car, the interior smelling of new leather, the seats heated, everything so different from her world. The drive to Mount Sinai Hospital was a blur for Florence. Mr. Oswald was silent most of the time, looking out the window, his hands clasped in silent prayer. When they arrived at the hospital, they were immediately escorted through private corridors to an entire floor reserved for VIP patients. A medical team was waiting at the door of a luxurious hospital suite. Dr. Henry, a man in his early 50s with a compassionate expression, approached Mr. Oswald. "She's stable now, but it was very serious. The condition is progressing faster than we expected." Florence remained in the hallway as Mr. Oswald entered the room. Through the ajar door, she could see a young woman lying on the hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and medical equipment. Brown hair spread across the white pillow, pale skin, a fragility that painfully reminded Florence of her own mother. Mr. Oswald approached the bed holding his daughter's hand, whispering words Florence couldn't hear. One of the lawyers, the younger one, approached Florence. "Miss Florence, my name is Dr. Anthony Mendez, personal attorney for the Thompson family. Mr. Thompson has instructed me to explain the situation. Miss Isabella, Mr. Oswald's only daughter, is 26 years old and suffers from a rare and debilitating autoimmune condition. It's the same disease that took Mrs. Thompson 2 years ago." Florence felt her stomach tighten. The same disease. The same words the doctors had used to describe what had taken her father when she was only 10. "Miss Isabella has access to the best doctors in the world, the most advanced treatments, everything money can buy," Dr. Mendez continued. "But what she doesn't have is genuine companionship, true friends. Her condition has isolated her. The people around her are there for the money, the social position, the access to wealth. She lives in profound loneliness, surrounded by luxury, but empty inside. Mr. Oswald fears she will give up fighting, and for a person who gives up, there is little that medical treatments can do." Florence looked into the room, seeing Mr. Oswald sitting by the bed, his head bowed, holding his daughter's hand. She understood then. She understood the loneliness, the desperation, the search for something genuine in a world of falsehood. Dr. Mendez continued, now taking an envelope from his inner jacket pocket. "Mr. Thompson would like to make you a proposal. He wishes to hire you as a full-time companion for his daughter. The salary would be $15,000 a month, in addition to housing in the family mansion, a premium health plan that would cover you and your mother, including all necessary medications and treatments. Additionally, Mr. Thompson would fully finance your higher education. I understand you had to drop out of your education degree a year ago for financial reasons." Florence felt her legs weaken. $15,000. Health insurance for her mother. College. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, everything that seemed impossible, but there was something that didn't make sense. "Why me?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "There are professionals, nurses, trained companions. Why a waitress?" Dr. Mendez smiled for the first time. "Because you saw a frail man and offered help without expecting anything in return. Because you showed patience, kindness, and compassion when it would have been easier to ignore him. Mr. Thompson believes these qualities cannot be taught in any school. You possess something rare, Miss Florence. A truly kind heart. That is exactly what Miss Isabella needs." Florence looked again into the room, at that young woman who, despite all her wealth, seemed as lost and alone as she herself often felt. She thought of her mother, of the medicines she couldn't buy, of the bills that were piling up. She thought of Robert, who had fired her with such cruelty, and she thought that maybe, just maybe, all the kindness she had offered the world was finally coming back to her. "I accept," she said, the words coming out firmly despite the tears that continued to fall. "I accept the offer." Dr. Mendez nodded in satisfaction and extended his hand. "Welcome to the Thompson family, Miss Florence." The Thompson family mansion on Park Avenue was everything Florence could have ever imagined. Wrought iron gates that opened automatically, meticulously manicured gardens with fountains and sculptures, an imposing three-story building with contemporary architecture blended with classic elements. As the car drove through the gates that first afternoon, Florence held her mother's hand tightly, both still processing the surreal turn their lives had taken in less than 24 hours. Celia, despite the weakness caused by her condition, maintained the dignity that had always characterized her. "Daughter," she whispered as she watched the mansion approach, "are you sure we're not dreaming?" Florence squeezed her hand and smiled through her tears. "If this is a dream, Mum, please don't wake me up." The mansion staff welcomed them with warm professionalism. The head housekeeper, Marissa, a 60-year-old woman with her hair in a bun and a welcoming smile, showed them to the rooms they would occupy. A complete suite on the second floor, with a spacious bedroom. A private bathroom with a whirlpool tub, a walk-in closet and a balcony overlooking the garden. Noble wood furniture, Egyptian cotton sheets, original paintings on the walls. "Mrs. Celia will stay here," Marissa explained, "and tomorrow a medical team will come to do a full evaluation. Mr. Thompson has already scheduled appointments with the best specialists in New York." Celia began to cry, her hands trembling as she touched the furniture, as if to confirm it was real. Florence hugged her tightly, both allowing themselves to finally feel the relief, the gratitude, the hope that maybe things could get better. After settling her mother in and helping her rest, Florence was taken to the third floor, where Isabella's quarters were. Marissa knocked gently on the door before opening it. "Miss Isabella was discharged from the hospital this morning. She's eager to meet you." Florence entered a room that looked more like an art gallery. Large windows allowed natural light to flood in. Shelves were filled with books, a grand piano stood in a corner, and original paintings that Florence recognized from museums she had only visited on school trips hung on the walls. And there, sitting in an armchair near the window, was Isabella. Even frail and pale, there was a delicate beauty about her. Large, expressive brown eyes, hair that fell in soft waves over her shoulders, slender hands holding a book that was clearly not being read. When Isabella saw Florence, her face lit up with a shy but genuine smile. "You must be Florence. My father won't stop talking about you." Her voice was soft, musical, but carried a weariness that went beyond the physical. Florence approached, not knowing exactly how to act. "Hello, Isabella. It's a pleasure to meet you." Isabella gestured for her to sit in the armchair next to her. "Please dispense with the formalities. Just call me Isa. Everyone calls me Miss Thompson, and it makes me feel like I'm 80 years old." Florence laughed, feeling an immediate connection. They talked for hours that first afternoon. Isabella spoke about her life, about how the illness had started when she was 19, about losing her mother to the same condition, about the loneliness of living in a gilded cage where no one saw the real person behind the surname and the fortune. Florence, in turn, shared her own story. The struggle to survive, the responsibility of caring for her mother, the postponed dreams of graduating with a degree in education, to work with children. Isabella listened with genuine attention, asking questions, showing real empathy. "You lost your father to the same disease I have," she said softly. "It must be hard to be here, seeing me like this." Florence shook her head. "It's not hard. It's a chance to make a difference, to be present in the way I wish someone had been for my father." The following days established a routine that seemed almost magical to Florence. She would wake up early, have breakfast with Celia, who was already visibly better with the new medications and constant medical supervision. Then she would spend the day with Isabella. They read together, talked about everything and nothing, watched movies, took short walks in the mansion's gardens when Isabella felt strong enough. Florence learned to recognize the signs of fatigue when Isabella needed to rest, how to distract her during painful treatments. Mr. Oswald watched everything with evident satisfaction. He had gone back to wearing clothes appropriate to his status, impeccable suits, expensive watches. But in Florence's eyes, he would always be that frail gentleman she helped drink coffee. A week after her move to the mansion, Mr. Oswald called her for a conversation in his office. It was an imposing room with a solid mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with business and law books, and large windows overlooking New York City. "Florence," he said, gesturing for her to sit, "I don't have enough words to thank you for what you're doing for Isabella. In 1 week, I've seen more life in her eyes than in the last 6 months. You've brought something that no medical treatment could bring. Hope." Florence felt her cheeks blush. "It is I who should be thanking you, Mr. Thompson. You've changed my mother's life and mine. I can never repay you." The old businessman smiled, but the smile quickly faded, replaced by a serious expression. "Unfortunately, I need to inform you of an unpleasant situation. My lawyer, Dr. Mendez, received a notification today. Robert Fonseca has filed a labor lawsuit against you. He's claiming job abandonment and is demanding $50,000 in damages." Florence felt the blood drain from her face. $50,000. "But that's absurd. He fired me. There were witnesses." Mr. Oswald waved his hand reassuringly. "I know, and my legal team is already handling it. But there's more. He has found a witness who is willing to swear that you abandoned your job without notice and that you have a history of unexcused absences." Florence stood up, indignant. Who? Who would lie like that?" "Patricia," Mr. Oswald said simply, "your former co-worker." The revelation hit Florence like a punch. Patricia. Of course. The envy that had always been there had now found a way to manifest itself. But why? What does she gain from this? Mr. Oswald sighed. Robert probably offered her money, or threatened her in some way. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you will not face this alone. I have the best lawyers in the country at your disposal. This lawsuit will not succeed." But Florence could barely hear. She felt violated, betrayed. She had helped Patricia countless times at the cafe, covered her shifts when she was late, shared tips even when she didn't have to. And this was her reward. Anger simmered inside her, an emotion she rarely allowed herself to feel. When she returned to Isabella's rooms, her friend immediately noticed something was wrong. "Tell me," Isabella said, taking her hands. Florence told her everything, the words pouring out in a stream of indignation and hurt. Isabella listened in silence, and then said something that surprised Florence. "I understand how you feel. My best friend from school, or at least who I thought was my best friend, pulled away when she found out I was sick. She said it was too depressing to be around me. People disappoint, Florence. But you know what I've learned? The ones who stay are the ones who truly matter, and I will stand by you in this." Their friendship deepened even more after that moment. They began to share not just time, but vulnerabilities, fears, dreams. Isabella revealed she had always wanted to be a painter, but the illness made it difficult to hold brushes for long. Florence suggested they paint together, and soon Isabella's room was filled with colorful canvases, some technically imperfect, but all full of life and emotion. Florence talked about her dream of working with children, of making a difference in education. Isabella began researching scholarship programs and opportunities, planning to help her as soon as everything was resolved. 3 weeks after Florence's arrival at the mansion, the official notice of the lawsuit arrived. Dr. Mendez took her to his office in downtown Manhattan, a glass and steel commercial building overlooking Fifth Avenue. The legal team consisted of 6 specialized lawyers, each focused on a different aspect of the case. They prepared her meticulously, rehearsing her testimony, gathering evidence, talking to cafe customers who could testify in her favor. But Robert wasn't playing fair. He hired an equally aggressive lawyer, known for winning cases through questionable tactics. Stories began to circulate on gossip sites, obviously planted by Robert. Waitress accused of taking advantage of billionaire. Young woman abandons job to con businessman. The headlines were sensational and cruel. Florence began receiving hateful messages on social media accounts she didn't even know she had. Strangers recognized her on the street and made malicious comments. One night, Florence broke down. Sitting in the mansion's garden, under the stars barely visible through New York's light pollution, she cried like she hadn't cried since she was a child. Isabella found her there, wrapped in a thin shawl, and sat beside her despite the cold. They sat in silence for a long time before Isabella finally spoke. "My father told me what they're saying on the internet. I'm so sorry you're going through this." Florence wiped her tears. "It's not fair. I just wanted to help. I just wanted to be kind." Isabella put an arm around her shoulders. "I know, and everyone who really matters knows. Robert will pay for this. My father doesn't rest when someone he loves is attacked. And you, Florence, you're family now." Those words touched Florence deeply. Family. She had lost her father young. Her mother was sick. She never had siblings. And now, in this enormous mansion with people she had barely known for a month, she had found a family. Perhaps not of blood, but of choice and of heart. What they didn't know was that Robert was just getting started. His plan went far beyond a simple labor lawsuit. He had hired investigators to dig into Florence's past, looking for anything he could use against her. And he had found something. Something about the father Florence barely remembered, about a man who had abandoned her as a child. Robert was preparing his final blow. It was a rainy Tuesday night when the mansion's doorbell rang insistently. It was almost 10 o'clock, and the house staff had already retired for the night. The security guard at the gate called the main room's intercom. "Mr. Thompson, there's a woman at the gates asking to speak urgently with Miss Florence. She says her name is Patricia Almeida, and that it's a matter of life and death." Mr. Oswald, Florence, and Isabella were watching a movie together in the living room when they received the news. Florence felt her entire body stiffen at the sound of the name. Patricia, the woman who had lied about her, who was testifying against her in the lawsuit. "You don't have to see her if you don't want to," Isabella said, touching her arm gently. Mr. Oswald nodded in agreement. Indeed, it could be a trap. Robert might be using her to get some kind of confession or create more false evidence. But something in the urgency of the message, the late hour, the rain pouring outside, made Florence hesitate. She thought of all the years she had known Patricia, before the envy, before the betrayal. She thought of the possibility, however small, that there might be a valid reason for this visit. "I want to see her," Florence said finally, "but with you present. If it's a trap, I want witnesses." Minutes later, Patricia was escorted into the living room by 2 security guards. She was soaked, her blonde hair stuck to her face, her makeup smeared, trembling not just from the cold but visibly from fear. Her clothes, which were usually impeccable, were wrinkled. She looked as if she hadn't slept in days. When she saw Florence, her eyes filled with tears. "Florence, please forgive me. Please, I need to tell you the truth before it's too late." Florence remained seated, her arms crossed, trying to maintain a neutral expression despite the turmoil of emotions. "Speak," she said simply. Patricia looked nervously at Mr. Oswald and Isabella, but Florence didn't. Asked them to leave. "What you have to say can be said in front of them. They're my family." Patricia nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Everything I said in the lawsuit is a lie. Robert forced me to lie. He threatened me, said he would fire me, that he would spread lies about me, that he would destroy my reputation. I was scared. I'm a coward. But that's not even the worst part." She took a plastic envelope from her coat pocket, protecting it from the water. With trembling hands, she extended it to Florence. Inside were photographs and documents. Florence opened the envelope and felt her stomach churn. They were photos of her with Mr. Oswald, but digitally manipulated to look suspicious. One showed her holding his hand in a way that looked intimate rather than supportive. Another showed her getting into a luxury car with him, the image edited to remove the lawyers and bodyguards who were also there. A third showed her receiving money from him, when in fact it was just her helping him count coins for the coffee. "Robert hired an image editing expert," Patricia continued, her voice choked. "He has dozens of these photos. He's going to present them as proof that you were running a con on Mr. Oswald from the beginning, that you planned everything, that the kindness was just a facade to get close to a rich man." Mr. Oswald stood up, his usually kind face now hard as stone. "This is defamation on a monumental scale. He will be prosecuted and jailed for this." Patricia shook her head frantically. "There's more. Much more." She pulled another document from the envelope. This one was not wet because it was inside a plastic bag. It was an Old newspaper article yellowed with time. The headline made Florence feel as if the floor had disappeared from under her feet. Man convicted of fraud and forgery. And there in the grainy old photo was the face she barely remembered. Her father, Charles Albert Sanders. The man who had abandoned her when she was 7, who had disappeared from their lives, and whom her mother never liked to talk about. Robert hired private investigators, Patricia explained, the words tumbling out as if she needed to spill everything before losing her courage. They found out your father was prosecuted and convicted 20 years ago for conning elderly people. He would pretend to befriend vulnerable individuals and then steal their life savings. Robert plans to present this to the media, to make it look like you inherited your father's criminal tendencies, that you're doing exactly what he did, that manipulating the elderly is in your blood. Florence couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to be closing in on her. Isabella immediately came closer, holding her hands. Breathe, Florence. Slowly. You are not your father. You are not responsible for what he did. But Florence could barely hear. Long-buried memories began to surface. She vaguely remembered men knocking on their door, her mother crying, neighbors whispering. She remembered having to change schools mid-year, her mother changing her last name, trying to start over. Sanders. She had gone back to using her mother's maiden name to escape the stigma. Mr. Oswald approached Patricia, his voice cold and controlled. When does Robert plan to release this? Tomorrow, she replied. He's scheduled a press conference for tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon. He's going to present the fake photos, her father's history, everything. He's inviting all the major media outlets. He wants to turn this into a national scandal. He wants to completely destroy Florence's reputation, and while he's at it, tarnish yours as well, Mr. Thompson. He's going to suggest that your company is being infiltrated by con artists. Why are you telling me this? Florence finally managed to say, her voice a hoarse whisper. Why now? Patricia fell to her knees, sobbing. Because I can't live with this anymore. Because I look in the mirror and I don't recognize the person I've become. Because you were always good to me, always helped me, and I repaid you with betrayal. Because Robert asked me to do something I can't do. He asked me to break into the mansion and plant false evidence in your room. Drugs, stolen money, anything to incriminate you further. And I finally understood that if I did that, there would be no turning back. I would be as evil as he is. The silence that followed was heavy. Florence looked at the woman at her feet, who had always been petty and envious, but never truly evil. There was a difference, Florence realized, between weakness and wickedness. Patricia was weak, easily manipulated, but there was a line she couldn't cross. Get up, Florence said softly. Patricia looked up at her with hope and fear. You made terrible mistakes. You lied about me. You betrayed me. You caused me suffering. But you came here, in the rain, risking Robert's wrath to warn me. That counts. Do you have more information? Mr. Oswald asked, already in business mode, planning the counterattack. Patricia nodded. I have audio recordings. Robert bragged about the whole plan to me, in minute detail. He's arrogant. He didn't think I could betray him. I started recording conversations on my phone 2 weeks ago, when I started feeling bad about all this. I have him confessing about the fake photos, about the plan to use Florence's father's past, about bribing witnesses, about the investigators he hired. Everything. Mr. Oswald and Florence exchanged a look. This changed everything. Dr. Mendez was called immediately, even though it was almost midnight. He arrived in less than 30 minutes, accompanied by 2 other lawyers and a digital forensics expert. Patricia was taken to Mr. Oswald's office, where she spent the next 4 hours providing every detail, handing over the recordings explaining every part of Robert's plan. The recordings were incriminating. Robert's voice was clear, undisguised, describing exactly how he planned to destroy Florence. He talked about how he hated seeing humble people prosper, how her kindness to Mr. Oswald disgusted him because it exposed his own cruelty. He talked about how he was going to use the media to create a circus, about how he already had corrupt journalists ready to publish anything he asked. It was all there, every sordid detail of his plan for extortion and defamation. Dr. Mendez listened to it all with an increasingly grave expression. When Patricia finished, it was past 3 in the morning. He turned to Mr. Oswald. "We have enough material not only to defend her from the labor lawsuit, but to prosecute Robert for defamation, forgery, conspiracy to commit extortion, harassment, among other things. He's going to spend years dealing with lawsuits, but we need to act fast. If he holds that press conference tomorrow, even if we later prove everything is a lie, the damage will already be done." "Then we will hold our own press conference," said Mr. Oswald, his voice carrying the authority of decades commanding business empires. "At the same time as his, we will invite the same media, and we will expose everything publicly. The lies, the manipulations, the recordings. We will turn the tables on him." Isabella, who had remained silent, observing everything, finally spoke. "I'll be there. I will defend Florence publicly. I want everyone to know the kind of person she really is." Florence was physically and emotionally exhausted. The weight of what was to come, the public exposure, the revelation of her father's past that she had kept as a shameful secret for so many years. But looking around, seeing Mr. Oswald ready to fight for her, Isabella determined to defend her, the lawyers working tirelessly, and even Patricia, who had redeemed herself by risking everything to do the right thing. Florence felt something awaken within her. It wasn't just anger or a desire for revenge. It was dignity. It was the refusal to let someone like Robert define who she was. The team worked through the night preparing the counterattack. Forensic imaging experts were called to analyze and prove the forgery of the photos. A presentation was prepared with the audio recordings. Witnesses from the cafe were contacted and agreed to testify. Robert's background was thoroughly investigated, revealing a trail of labor irregularities, tax evasion, and questionable business practices. When the sun rose over New York that Wednesday, the Thompson team was ready for battle. Robert had completely underestimated who he was fighting against, and he was about to discover the price of his arrogance and cruelty. The Plaza Hotel, one of New York's most luxurious, had been chosen by Robert to host his press conference. At 2:45 in the afternoon, the event hall was packed with journalists, cameras, photographers, and onlookers. Robert had ensured maximum coverage, promising a scandal that would involve one of the country's wealthiest businessmen. The room buzzed with speculation and anticipation. No one knew that in the adjacent ballroom, separated only by a movable partition, another press conference was being prepared simultaneously. Florence sat on a chair backstage, her hands cold despite the heat of the day. She wore a simple but elegant outfit that Isabella had insisted she wear, a navy blue dress that conveyed seriousness and dignity. Her mother sat beside her, holding her hand, finally strong enough to be present, thanks to the treatments she had been receiving. Celia looked as if she had aged backward 10 years in the past few weeks, her skin regaining color, her eyes shining with life again. Isabella entered the preparation room wearing a white suit, looking fragile but with unshakable determination in her eyes. She had insisted on participating despite her father's objections about the stress affecting her health. "I'm stronger now than I've been in years," she had argued, "and that's thanks to Florence. I won't let her face this alone." Mr. Oswald, wearing one of his impeccable Italian suits, gathered everyone for a final talk before the doors opened. "Robert believes he has the upper hand," he said, his voice calm but firm. "He believes his cruelty, and his lies will prevail because they always have before. But today he learns that there is a limit, that there are people willing to fight for what is right." Dr. Mendez checked the documents one last time, the audio recordings tested and ready to be played, the forensic analyses of the fake photos printed and organized. Patricia was in a separate room, protected by security, ready to testify when called. In the main hall, Robert took the stage set up for the occasion. He was visibly confident, an arrogant smile on his face, waving to acquaintances in the audience. Beside him, his lawyer, a portly man in a grey suit who was sweating nervously despite the air conditioning. Robert had prepared an elaborate presentation, slides with the manipulated photos, documents about Florence's father's past, even an edited video showing moments in the cafe taken out of context. "Good afternoon," Robert began, his voice amplified by the microphones. "Thank you all for coming. Today I will reveal a scandal that involves not only an attempted con against one of the richest men in America, but also issues of security, infiltration, and manipulation that affect our society. He pressed a button, and the first image appeared on the screen behind him. It was one of the manipulated photos of Florence with Mr. Oswald. This young woman, Robert continued with studied drama, Florence Sanders, worked at my establishment for 2 years. During that time, I observed suspicious behavior. She showed an excessive interest in a customer who presented himself as a simple man. What I didn't know then was that she had already investigated his true identity and was executing an elaborate plan of approach. Cameras clicked furiously. Journalists scribbled down every word. Robert was in his element, savoring every moment. It was then that the partition between the ballrooms was opened. The noise was deafening as the movable wall slid back, revealing the second stage where Mr. Oswald, Florence, Isabella, Celia, and the full team of lawyers were waiting. The confusion was instantaneous. Journalists ran from one side to the other. Cameras swiveled, voices overlapped in absolute chaos. Robert stood frozen on the stage, his smile freezing and then disappearing completely as he saw who was in the adjacent hall. Mr. Oswald walked to his own microphone with the dignity of someone who had commanded empires for decades. "I apologize for the unusual interruption," he said, his voice cutting through the turmoil. "But it seemed appropriate that both versions of this story be presented simultaneously. This way, the truth and the lie can be compared in real time." Robert tried to speak, but his microphone had been cut by the technical crew that Mr. Oswald's lawyers had strategically positioned. "My name is Oswald Thompson," the businessman continued, "and I can confirm that I know Miss Florence Sanders. She was indeed a waitress at Mr. Robert Fonseca's establishment, and it is true that for 3 months she helped me daily." He paused, letting the tension build. What Mr. Fonseca failed to mention is that during those 3 months I was in disguise. I dressed as a common, humble man to test the character of the people around me, a practice my late wife always encouraged. The room erupted in murmurs. Robert tried to shout something, but without a microphone his voice was lost in the noise. Mr. Oswald continued, "Of all the people I met during that period, only one showed genuine kindness. Only one person saw a frail human being and offered help without expecting anything in return. Florence Sanders. She didn't know who I was. She had no interest in my wealth because she believed I had none. Her compassion was pure and selfless." Isabella approached the microphone, her voice soft but clear. "My name is Isabella Thompson. I am Mr. Oswald's daughter, and I suffer from a debilitating condition. Florence was hired to be my companion, yes, but not because my father was deceived, because he recognized in her rare qualities: kindness, patience, genuine empathy. In a few short weeks, she became more than an employee. She became my friend, my sister, part of our family." It was Dr. Mendez's turn to take the microphone. "Now let's address the specific accusations made by Mr. Fonseca." He pressed a button, and images began to appear on the screen. "These are the photographs Mr. Fonseca planned to present as evidence of manipulation. However, we submitted these images for forensic analysis by 3 independent experts. All of them were digitally manipulated. The technical analyses appeared on the screen, highlighting altered pixels, inconsistent shadows, and metadata that proved digital editing. The journalists' reaction was immediate and intense. Questions were shouted, cameras focused alternately on Robert, who had turned visibly pale, and on the Thompson team. But Dr. Mendez wasn't finished. Furthermore, Mr. Fonseca planned to use the past of Miss Florence's father to defame her. A father who abandoned her when she was 7 years old and for whose actions she bears no responsibility. However, while investigating, we discovered the following about Mr. Robert Fonseca. A new series of documents appeared on the screen. Systemic tax evasion for 7 years. Labor violations including non-payment of overtime. Failure to properly register employees, documented psychological harassment. 3 lawsuits from former employees for inadequate working conditions. And this is just what we discovered in 2 weeks. For investigation, the IRS will receive a full copy of this dossier later today. Robert finally managed to get to a microphone at his table, "This is ridiculous," he screamed, his voice shrill and desperate. "It's all lies. You're using power and money to cover up a con. She manipulated a senile old man." Dr. Mendez smiled coldly. Senile, an interesting choice of words. "Mr. Thompson, would you care to demonstrate your mental capacity?" The businessman chuckled. "With pleasure." For the next 5 minutes, he recited from memory financial statistics of his companies, stock quotes, details of recent contracts. His mind was as sharp as it had ever been, but the real bombshell was yet to come. Dr. Mendez gestured and Patricia entered the hall, escorted by security. Robert saw her, and his face went from pale to purple with rage. His star witness, his accomplice. What was she doing here? Patricia approached the microphone, visibly nervous but determined. "My name is Patricia Almeida. I worked with Florence at Mr. Fonseca's cafe, and I lied in the labor lawsuit. I was coerced by Robert Fonseca to give false testimony against Florence." The chaos in the room reached new heights. Journalists shouted questions. Photographers pushed to get better angles. Robert tried to leave the stage but was blocked by security. Patricia continued, her voice gaining strength. "But I have more to reveal. Robert Fonseca planned not only to defame Florence, but to extort the Thompson family. He created fake photographs, hired investigators to dig into Florence's past, and asked me to break into the Thompson mansion to plant false evidence. All of this I can prove with recordings I made of our conversations." Dr. Mendez pressed play on a professional sound system. Robert's voice filled the hall, clear and unmistakable. In the recordings, he bragged about his plan, described in detail how he would manipulate the media, laughed about how he would destroy an innocent young woman's life just because her kindness made him feel inferior. There were 10 minutes of incriminating recordings, and Dr. Mendez played the most damning excerpts. The effect was devastating. Journalists who had previously seemed skeptical now looked at Robert with revulsion. Cameras captured every moment of his breakdown. He tried to speak, to defend himself, but anything he said only made the situation worse. His lawyer had already abandoned the stage, literally running for the exit. It was then that 2 federal agents entered the hall. "Robert Fonseca," one of them announced, "you are being detained for investigation of document forgery, conspiracy to commit extortion, harassment, and defamation. You have the right to remain silent." The arrest was broadcast live across the country. Robert screamed about injustice, about persecution, but his words were empty against the weight of the evidence. As he was escorted out, Florence finally approached the microphone. Her voice trembled at first, but gained firmness as she spoke. "I'm not perfect. I come from humble origins. My father made terrible mistakes that I am ashamed of. But I've learned that we are not defined by where we come from or by the mistakes of our parents. We are defined by the choices we make. I chose to help a man I thought was alone, not for what he could give me, but because it was the right thing to do. And that choice changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. It brought me a family. It brought hope for my mother. It brought me a friendship I value more than any wealth." She looked at Isabella, who was smiling. Through tears, "If this is a con, then I hope more people will pull cons of kindness and compassion in this world." The room erupted in applause, not just from the Thompson family's guests, but from journalists, hotel staff, people who had come in out of curiosity and left having witnessed something extraordinary. Isabella joined Florence, hugging her tightly. Mr. Oswald placed his hands on both their shoulders, tears streaming down his aged face. Celia was crying with happiness. Even Patricia was crying, but for the first time in weeks they were tears of relief. The news spread rapidly. Within hours, Florence's name was trending on social media, but now with hashtags of support and admiration. The headlines that once defamed her now celebrated her story. Kind waitress disproves accusations with dignity. Greedy businessman arrested while trying to destroy innocent young woman. True wealth lies in kindness. Robert's cafe was closed by the authorities the next day, sealed while investigations into his irregularities proceeded. The employees he had exploited for years would finally receive justice. 1 year and 3 months after the press conference that changed everything, Florence sat in a chair in the auditorium of Columbia University, wearing her graduation gown. Her heart pounded as she waited for her name to be called. Around her, classmates chatted excitedly about their next steps, about jobs already secured, about dreams that were about to come true. But none of them, Florence was sure, had walked a path as extraordinary as hers. In the audience, surrounded by a small crowd of discreet but vigilant security guards, was her family. Mr. Oswald, now using an elegant cane but much stronger and healthier than in those days at the cafe, occupied a place of honor in the front row. Beside him, Isabella, radiant in a spring dress that matched the occasion, her eyes shining with renewed life. The condition that threatened to consume her had stabilized significantly in recent months, with doctors attributing the improvement not only to cutting-edge treatments, but to the emotional well-being that her friendship with Florence had brought. Celia sat between Isabella and Mr. Oswald, holding both their hands. She looked like a completely different woman from the one who had lived in the small apartment just over a year ago. Proper treatment, the right medications, appropriate nutrition, and the end of the constant stress of not knowing if she could pay the bills had worked a miracle. Her hair, once thin and lifeless, was now healthy and well cut. Her skin had color. Her eyes, those same kind eyes Florence had inherited, shone with maternal pride. A few rows back, Patricia Almeida watched the ceremony with a mixture of joy and melancholy. She had received an alternative sentence for her initial participation in Robert's scheme, required to perform community service and pay a fine. More importantly, she had undergone months of therapy, confronting her envy, her weakness of character, her wrong choices. Florence, in an act of generosity that surprised even Mr. Oswald, had interceded for her, arguing that Patricia deserved a second chance. Now Patricia worked at a charity run by the Thompson Foundation, helping at-risk youth. It was a job that was transforming her from the inside out. Florence Sanders, the dean's voice echoed through the auditorium, graduating with a degree in education with academic honors. The audience erupted in applause. Florence stood up, her legs trembling slightly, and walked to the stage. As she received the diploma from the dean's hands, she looked out at the audience and met her mother's eyes. Celia was crying, her hands over her heart. Beside her, Mr. Oswald and Isabella were on their feet, applauding. Soon the entire section where they sat was standing, and then the applause spread until the whole auditorium was giving a standing ovation, not just for her academic achievement, but for everything she represented. The ceremony continued, but for Florence, the next few minutes were a blur of emotion. When it finally ended and she could reunite with her family outside, she was enveloped in hugs and words of congratulations. "My girl," Celia whispered, holding Florence's face in her hands. "You did it. Despite everything, you did it." Florence kissed her mother's forehead. "We did it, Mom, together. Always together." Isabella pulled her into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you, sister. And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I'm jealous." Florence laughed through her tears. "Jealous of what?" "Of you achieving something I'll never have," Isabella replied, but there was only affection in her voice, not bitterness. "You earned this on your own merit, with your own effort. I was born with everything. You built everything. That's so much more valuable." Mr. Oswald waited his turn and then wrapped Florence in a fatherly embrace. When they separated, his eyes were moist. "My wife would have been so happy to know you. She always said that true nobility comes not from titles or wealth, but from character. You would have been the daughter she always dreamed of having." Florence felt a lump in her throat. "You gave me everything," she said. "No," he corrected gently. "You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever. Faith in humanity, purpose, a complete family again." The celebration continued at an elegant restaurant that Mr. Oswald had reserved entirely for the occasion. It wasn't just the immediate family, but also mansion staff who had become Florence's friends, university professors who had marked her academic journey, even some old customers from the cafe who had witnessed Florence's kindness and offered to testify in her favor throughout the ordeal. It was a celebration not just of a graduation, but of an extraordinary journey of kindness rewarded. During dinner, Mr. Oswald stood to make a toast. He gently tapped his crystal glass, getting everyone's attention. "A little over a year ago," he began, his voice firm but emotional, I was a lost man. I had everything. Money could buy, but I didn't have what truly matters. My wife was gone, my daughter was fading, and I was desperate to find some meaning, some goodness, in a world that seemed increasingly cruel. So I decided to conduct a test. I dressed as a common, humble man and went out into the streets to look for genuine kindness. I visited dozens of places. I found indifference, disdain, sometimes even cruelty. I was about to give up when I walked into a small cafe on Bleecker Street. He looked at Florence with a warm smile. And there I found a young waitress who saw a trembling old man and didn't see an opportunity or a problem. She saw a human being who needed help. The room was in absolute silence, all eyes on Mr. Oswald. For 3 months, every single day, Florence dedicated her time and her patience to help me. Not because I could pay well, I barely paid for the coffee. Not because her boss appreciated it, he humiliated her for it. She did it because it's who she is. Kind, compassionate, genuine. He raised his glass. Today we celebrate her academic graduation, but I celebrate something greater. I celebrate the fact that people like Florence exist, that genuine kindness still exists, and that sometimes doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when no one is watching, can change not just one life, but many. The toasts followed, each person sharing how Florence had touched their lives. Isabella spoke of how their friendship had saved her from despair. Celia spoke of the pride of seeing her daughter not just survive, but thrive. Patricia, in a choked voice, thanked Florence for showing her that redemption was possible, that mistakes could be corrected, that it was never too late to choose to be better. When it was Florence's turn to speak, she stood up, her legs still trembling with emotion. Looking at everyone gathered there, she began. "A year ago, I was sitting in a hospital, having just been fired, not knowing how I would pay for my mother's medicine, thinking my life was over. Today I'm here, a graduate with a family I love, seeing my mother healthy, seeing my best friend strong and happy. If someone had told me a year ago that this would be possible, I wouldn't have believed it. But I learned something important on this journey. I learned that kindness is not weakness. I learned that helping someone, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one is thanking you, even when you have your own problems, it matters. It matters in ways we cannot predict." She looked at Mr. Oswald. "When I helped Mr. Oswald drink his coffee every morning, I wasn't thinking about rewards. I was just doing what my mother taught me, to see the human being, not the circumstances. And that changed my life. But more importantly," she continued, now looking at Isabella, "it gave me something no money can buy. A sister, a true friend, someone who knows my soul and loves me anyway." Isabella was crying openly now, as was half the room. Florence concluded. "So my wish today is not just to celebrate my graduation, it's to encourage every person here and every person who hears this story to practice kindness, to help when you can, to see beyond appearances, because you never know when a simple gesture of holding a coffee cup for someone can transform lives." The applause was deafening. People stood, hugs were exchanged, tears were shed freely. It was a moment of pure joy, a celebration not just of individual achievements, but of the triumph of kindness over cruelty, of truth over lies, of love over hate. In the weeks following her graduation, Florence began her job as a teacher at a public school in an underserved area of New York. Mr. Oswald had offered to finance a private school for her to run, but Florence had politely declined. "I want to work where I'm needed most," she explained, "where I can make the biggest difference." The businessman smiled and instead created a scholarship fund for Florence's students, who demonstrated academic excellence and good character. Isabella, inspired by Florence's dedication, began to work actively in the Family Foundation, focusing specifically on programs for people with chronic health conditions. She used her own experience to create support groups, emotional wellness programs, and initiatives to combat the loneliness that so many sick people faced. She and Florence would spend their evenings planning together, dreaming of ways to expand the Foundation's reach. As for Robert, he faced extensive criminal proceedings. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The recordings provided by Patricia, the dossier of fiscal and labor irregularities, testimonies from employees he had exploited and humiliated. He was found guilty on multiple charges and sentenced to years of community service, heavy fines, and a ban from operating any business for a decade. His cafe was sold to pay off debts, and the new owner turned it into an establishment that valued its employees as much as its customers. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, exactly a year and a half after that transformative press conference, Florence and Isabella decided to pay a visit. They walked together down Bleecker Street until they reached the cafe. Now with a new name, new management, but occupying the same space. The corner table, the one near the window, was still there. They ordered 2 coffees and sat exactly where Florence used to sit with Mr. Oswald. "Do you miss those days?" Isabella asked softly, watching Florence look out the window. Florence thought for a moment. They were hard days, days of struggle, of uncertainty, of fear for the future, but there was beauty in them too, the simplicity of a kind gesture, the purity of helping without expecting anything in return. She smiled at Isabella. "And those days brought me you, so no, I don't miss them, but I'm grateful for them." They sat there for an hour, talking, laughing, watching life happen on the bustling streets of New York. 2 young women from completely different worlds, united by extraordinary circumstances and transformed by mutual kindness. When they stood up to leave, Florence left a generous tip for the waitress who had served them. The young woman, who couldn't have been more than 20, thanked her with a tired but genuine smile. Florence held her hand briefly. "Keep being kind," she said. "You never know how a simple gesture can change everything." Walking back to the car that was waiting for them, Isabella linked her arm with Florence's. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "if someone wrote our story, nobody would believe it. It's too extraordinary." Florence laughed. "Maybe. But I think that's what makes life interesting. You never know when you'll find magic in the most unexpected places. Sometimes in a simple cafe, sometimes in a gesture of kindness, sometimes in a friendship that shouldn't exist, but becomes the most important thing in your life." That night, the entire Thompson family, including Florence, Celia, and even Patricia, who had been gradually reintegrated into the circle, gathered at the mansion for dinner. It was a tradition. They had established a family dinner every Friday, where there was no talk of business or problems, only of joys, dreams, and gratitude. Marissa prepared a feast, and everyone sat at the large dining table that, according to Mr. Oswald, hadn't been so full of life in decades. As they shared the meal and the stories of the day, Florence looked around the table. She saw her mother laughing at a joke Isabella had told, her eyes shining with health and happiness. She saw Mr. Oswald telling a story about the grandchildren Isabella might one day give him, his eyes no longer carrying the devastating loneliness she had seen that first morning in the cafe. She saw Isabella, her sister of the heart, radiant and full of plans for the future. She saw Patricia finally at peace with herself, contributing to the conversation with a humility she had never shown before. And Florence understood that this was true wealth. Not the paintings on the walls, not the cars in the garage, not the bank account that now had more zeros than she had ever dreamed of. The wealth was in the shared laughter, the sincere hugs, the certainty of being. Loved not for what she had or what she could do, but simply for who she was. This was the lesson her journey had taught her. That kindness offered freely returns multiplied. That genuine compassion creates bonds stronger than any contract. That a generous heart attracts an abundance that money cannot buy. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Florence and Isabella has touched your hearts in the same way it touched ours as we told it. This extraordinary journey reminds us that true wealth is not in what we possess, but in how we treat those around us, especially when they can offer us nothing in return. Florence's kindness, offered without expectation to a trembling old man in a cafe, transformed not only her life, but the lives of everyone around her. It teaches us that every gesture of compassion, no matter how small it may seem, can create waves of change that go far beyond what we can imagine. If this story resonated with you, if it made you reflect on the importance of genuine kindness in a world that often values only profit and power, we would like to invite you to be part of this community that celebrates the complexities and beauties of human life. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next stories that bring deep reflections on love, redemption, family, and the strength of character. Leave a like if Florence's journey inspired you, and share in the comments if you have ever experienced or witnessed a moment where kindness transformed a situation. We would love to hear your own stories. Over here, you will find a specially prepared playlist with other equally moving narratives that explore different facets of the human experience. Each story is a window to better understand ourselves and the world around us. Until the next emotional journey, and always remember, the kindness you offer today may be the light someone needs to transform their tomorrow. We are waiting for you in the comments.